Hey, how you doing?
Not too bad. Thanks so much for joining. So Chris Fitzpatrick, Vice President of Business Analytics and Strategy at Vineyard Vines. Chris, why don't you start? Just tell us a little bit about Vineyard Vines and what the VP of Analytics and Strategy means.
Yeah, so Vineyard Vines, we're roughly a 20-plus-year-old retailer of apparel and accessories based out of Connecticut. We have roughly 100 doors, a little bit over 100 retail doors across the U.S., as well as a pretty robust e-commerce and wholesale business. My role at Vineyard Vines it has a couple of different pillars to it. One is data analytics and the kind of the data science component of it rolls up into me. We have a kind of business strategy component to my team where we're helping the executive team identify future trends and future opportunities, and then that parlays into business development, which is kind of a new aspect of my team's role to kind of marry the three things, right? Data analytics kind of begets like where you go and how you get there, and then measuring how those things are performing as you move forward.
Absolutely. And from a background standpoint, so many folks that we talk to and potentially people in this audience assume, VP of Analytics, you have a data science background, you came from a deep technical background, but that wasn't the path for you. So maybe you give it just a minute around kind of your background and how you ended up in analytics.
Yeah, my background is probably a little bit strange for the roles that I'm in. I started out my career in finance and banking, and I moved through that kind of world, decided that I wanted to do something that was a little bit more tangible. I didn't really particularly care for working in the banking industry where I couldn't really understand, I wanted to touch and feel the product. So I transitioned and worked for Timberland for about 8 years in various roles, finance to begin with. And then I moved into business strategy while I was there for a number of years. I worked on an SAP implementation, and I still have the scars to show that. Then I worked for our head of product for a number of years. So I sat in the merchandising and design worlds, helping them understand their business and trends. And then about 7 years ago, moved over to Vineyard Vines, working in a financial role, more of an FP&A perspective, not on the accounting side. And that background, I think, gave me a lot of visibility to where all the different kind of tranches and buckets of data sat in the business and how siloed some of the information was. And it also gave me a sense of the different challenges across the business, whether it be commercially within our different pillars of our business or the back of the house, and being able to tie those things together and understand where there are opportunities to integrate analytics into our business and data to kind of democratize data across the business. So everybody was working off the same information, but also could look at it in different ways that were most applicable to the way that they needed to use the information. And that's what we've been working on for the past 2 years, and seen quite a bit of success over the last 6 months or so as we've kind of scaled and brought more people into the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a great talking point, the background, because, you and I have talked offline multiple times about the value of understanding how to leverage analytics and how to apply them in the business. So I always think it's incredible, your background, and you do a really good job of that. So today we've talked a little bit about, kind of the different strategic imperatives and the different ways that companies have been dealing with the crisis. Obviously the initial reaction, and then starting to plan out the recovery. And, we've been working for a couple of years together to start building muscle around getting those insights and getting accessibility to the business. I love the way you said it, democratizing data. And we've brought in internal data, of course, and we've utilized external data. But as you're looking at recovery at Vineyard Vines and new seasons ahead, what are ways that you're particularly focusing on leveraging data today?
Yeah, I think for one, when we walked into the COVID-19 crisis, you're quickly looking at, I think one of your panelists, Dwayne, mentioned like cash preservation, right? Like inventory to us is our single biggest use of cash in a given year, and using that in a way that's most effective to drive the business, but at the same time, controlling that cash outlay, because we have to become more productive, because there's not as much cash coming in, right? We have 100 plus doors that are closed right now. They've been closed for multiple months. They drive a significant amount of revenue and cash flow. Our wholesale partners are also all closed because their brick and mortar doors are closed. So that's a significant cash flow to our business. That became an imperative to really understand inventory, what we own currently, right? What's the liability we have potentially, and how do we move through that inventory in a way that's most beneficial to the brand from a margin perspective, but also from a brand perspective, because you don't want to dilute yourself by just marking things down really heavily. And then looking out into the future and saying, okay, well, what was the intent of the upcoming seasons? What were we buying? What did the line look like? What do we absolutely need to drive the business? What are the things that are most important to our consumers, right? So we had to take a step back and look at that inventory position and say, our customers gravitate towards these products, so we need these for sure. Some of these other things, like which ones are most important to us and which other things are most bullish about, so that we could formulate a plan and an interesting story around the product, because we don't want it to be a commodity and it's just a shirt. We need to we are storytellers at the end of the day. And so there's a balance there between, just pulling back entirely and suffocating your brand, at the same time investing in things that can help you drive the business and use that inventory wisely. That kind of gets you your answer? Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a lot in there. The different layers that you just spoke through and kind of getting that visibility is not one platform. It's not one source system of data. There's a lot going on in there. So talk a little bit more about what are the big areas of data that were so important for you to have that visibility, and maybe contrast it with things you were able to do today that you weren't able to do a couple years ago.
Yeah, so one of those being is just looking at peak selling periods in our year, right? And understanding, back to school and holiday and those points in the summer that are really important to us, like Father's Day, those peak periods. And historically, we were able to kind of see, the revenue trends in there. We could see what we sold, but we couldn't actually marry that up with our customer and our consumer and understand, who was gravitating to those products and who was buying those at those points in time in the year, and what was the value of that consumer to our whole brand. So we're using the data today to look at the intersection of both those things, right? We're looking at the financial impacts of some of the things we're doing. We're looking at the consumer who gravitated towards it historically, and we're saying, okay, well, these are the products they bought. This is how valuable they are to the brand. This is how often they shop. So if I brought a consumer in Father's Day, do they come back at back to school and holiday, or do they just come in and shop that one time? All right, well, if I'm going to balance, I have to choose between a certain product. I'm going to choose the products that are going to gravitate towards that person that comes back multiple times in a given year. And through the data, we can see those things now, right? We can help our planning and merchandising teams look at the business and say, okay, yeah, I know you guys really love this particular garment, but there was really only one consumer that shopped it last year, and they really weren't that valuable to us. Whereas these garments or these items that you put into the line last year really resonated, and we saw people come back multiple times throughout the year, and there was something to those products. There was a hook to them that brought them into the brand and retained them or acquired new people. So that's one of the ways that we're using the information to really understand those big peak selling periods that we're coming up on going into this year, to make sure that we're protecting the business and driving value, but also making sure we're not disappointing customers. We're, lucky to a degree where the customer base that we service, they tend to be in the upper income brackets. They tend to be a little bit more protected at this point anyway, it seems, from a lot of what's going on in the market. So that's helped us kind of get through the last couple of months, and we continue to drive a pretty significant amount of value to our e-com business. And part of that is knowing who our consumer is and being able to talk to them in a way and say, hey, these are the products we know you love. We're keeping them in the brand, and we're promoting them a little bit to get them to come back in.
Yeah, it's so incredible, both aspects of that, because it's so common now for companies to talk about being customer centric, especially in retail. And I think most folks think of marketing and customer service when they think of customer centric. And obviously the last example you gave of being able to understand customers and which products are meaningful to them and kind of their behaviors and ways to personalize has influenced your ability to use the e-com channel. But I don't know how many people are layering customer information into those merchandising and planning conversations or into their the way they look at inventory or some of their supply chain components. So has that been a shift that was well received, or was there a change component on your side to kind of introduce customer conversations into those teams?
It's changed over the last couple of years, and it's really been driven by our president, Mike Gallmer. I think he's been with the brand for pretty much since the inception. And as a smaller brand over the years, it's pretty easy to get your hands around, right? You can see what's happening in the business. You can somewhat, go out to the stores and understand what's resonating with the consumer. But as we've gotten bigger and we've grown pretty significantly, particularly over the last 5 years, your visibility to what's impacting the business changes and it becomes more difficult. And he was naturally looking for ways to understand what was going on, not just in the Fairfield County area of the business, but what's going on in St. Louis, what's going on in California, and places that he couldn't get to day to day, week to week, and wanting to understand what are the different dynamics at play in each one of those markets, and how is the consumer different, and what are they buying, and what are they not, so he could inform his decision making better and challenge our executive team also when looking at the data and comparing it against what he's being told. It gave him the power to drive the business a bit more. And he's been, instrumental in driving that discussion across the business. And within our organization, generally if your president's on board, then everybody else has to kind of fall in line. And he's been driving a lot of that engagement. It's taken time, and it's not a natural thing. You have to take into consideration the apparel and footwear world has traditionally been more art than science, right? It's probably been driven by design and fashion and that art view of the world. And over the last 5-6 years, you're seeing it kind of start to transition where, there is more science being integrated to it. And you're seeing designers and merchandisers slowly gravitate that way to want to integrate how they think about the consumer and their products with a little bit of data, not all of it, but enough of it that can inform some of their decisions and also reward them when they do well, right? If I'm a designer and I create this garment and it sells well, and I now can see that where traditionally no one ever even told me how it performed, that's also a positive thing. And it helps them understand, when I designed that, I was thinking about this. What other things am I thinking about in future seasons where I can extrapolate on that? Because the customer obviously gravitated towards it.
Absolutely. And I think it's fascinating insight, and it's a really good point to resurface or focus on, which is once executive leadership starts driving the business through data and through insights, then it naturally creates momentum, right? It builds up that inertia because people, at Vineyard, we had scenarios where people were saying, what is he looking at? And I want access to that because I want to understand, what he's now, the way he's talking about the business. I want to have access to those same things. So it created this immediate desire for the way we're looking at the business now. And fortunately, that was pre-pandemic. And so I'm interested, from a theme that we heard earlier amongst the panelists were that the crisis has created this maturity or this focus that has kind of leapfrogged things that might have taken a year to execute on, whether it be innovation or whether it be adoption or change. Have you seen similar things as you're looking at inventory demand forecasting, as you're looking at some of these components, knowing that a lot of the data you were presenting or that you were using was newer as far as being able to stitch all of it together and see the whole life cycle? How was that focus, and do you feel like there was an increase in performance from an adoption standpoint?
There certainly has been, and there's just been a need across our businesses to have more data available to them so they can make quicker decisions. I mean, every minute of every day right now, you're making some pretty significant decisions that can have, long life impacts on the business in totality. And our teams, as we walked into 2020, they're already, kind of stepping into this world, and they were really kind of getting more and more comfortable with it. But as they're being forced to make decisions in a somewhat of a real-time manner, having the information at your fingertips that you can consume in a way that draws your eye to what those things that matter allows them to concentrate on the decision making and not on getting at the information. And traditionally it'd been the other way. They'd spend 80% of their time trying to get at data, and then you're quickly reviewing it and kind of making a gut decision to a degree because you didn't really have the amount of time you needed to analyze and understand what the dynamics of the information. Today, we're pivoting more towards it's being served up to a degree. They can ask that first question, but they can also go down to the second, third, and fourth questions that they had naturally, but they couldn't answer before. And one of the benefits that I have for my team is I have a number of people on my team who are quite good at laying out information, quite good at listening to the business and the questions they have, interpreting those questions, and then putting data into an environment and in a format that they can consume it, thinking about the question they asked, but also thinking about the 3 or 4 questions that they might have thought about if they had seen the first answer. So the combination of those two things have helped us really kind of push this forward really in a quick manner. And our teams have evolved really fast. I've been really impressed by our teams and the way that they're evolving the way they think about the business and making decisions over the last couple of months. It's been, as challenging as the environment's in, you're seeing like all these people and processes and the business kind of evolve in real time, which has been interesting.
That is very interesting. As you're looking at these different data points and as you're essentially writing the story that you're trying to tell or stitching it together so that you can drill down those different layers, how are you dealing with the fact that historical data, looking at, same sales year over year, or looking at anything prior to the pandemic becomes mostly irrelevant? How have you adapted kind of the performance management side to understand, well, how do we utilize any historical data in this?
I think we're using it to a degree, but we're also, what we're considering historical, the window is a lot tighter. Like we're looking at what performed last month and 2 months ago while we were in this environment and saying, okay, like that did pretty well. Why did that perform well? Because it's so unique. We've been lucky in the sense that we've had a couple of days in the last month where they rivaled Black Friday online, which is kind of insane to think about. But so many people have matriculated over to our website and to our e-com business that, we're just seeing a pretty significant amount of volume there. So it's challenging. We're using that historical data right now to look out into the future to understand how different promotions may have performed during the holiday season and who resonated towards those, and then comparing and contrasting it against, okay, well, what are we seeing right now? Is that dramatically different? Is there something unique about right now that we should take into consideration as we think about, back to school and the holiday periods? Because there are some dichotomies there where you're seeing people matriculate to certain product categories, right? So right now, comfort's obviously huge. For a fashion brand, it's a pretty big deal, right? All of a sudden people are pivoting away from buying, more traditional business casual clothes to things like I have on, like a quarter zip or like something lightweight, or the materials that you're even choosing are very, very different than what you might have chosen going into the office. Well, how does that look when you look out into the future and what you were buying and designing? Can you adapt that? Do you evolve it? Do you change it? How are fashion trends going to evolve coming out of the other side of this? And I suspect, in what I'm reading and what I see in our own business, is that fashion is going to change pretty dramatically. You're already seeing this matriculation over to athleisure just more generally in products. And this is just kind of accelerating that. And the fabrics you choose and the designs you choose are going to matter even more as you come out of the other side of this, because people are going to look for products that they can wear at home, because a lot more people are going to be working from home. for a longer period of time. Even if they don't need to, they're going to want to.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so as you're taking those insights, or as you're taking those hypotheses, with so much disruption from a supply chain side, how do you go about looking back into your supply chain and thinking what decisions are being impacted on the way you do make buys or which products are selecting? Maybe talk a little bit about how you're utilizing this buying behavior and the change and landscape to influence the way you're looking at buying.
Yeah, I mean, our merchandising and planning teams are working really, really closely together to understand the complexion of the line. What was the intent of the line going in? What are the things that we know are happening in the business right now? Okay, well, these particular categories then are becoming more important. Can we buy more deeply into these particular categories of products? Because we think there's a greater opportunity here than maybe we did 6 months ago when we were like thinking about the line. And then where are those products that just don't really make much sense anymore? And do we keep them in the line? Is there a need for them to live? You know, is there an intent for them to live? And does it do something for the brand that adds value? Whether it's more of a premium play and it's more of a marketing showpiece that you can storytell around, that is tied to some of the other products that we're planning on doing more volume on. One particular area of the business that's really kind of fascinating to me right now is in 2019, we placed a lot of emphasis on our female consumer and understanding her better and how she shopped. And our merchants and designers and planners have been building out the line and really evolving the women's business and the products that we were building for her and trying to, think about her more directly. And our teams were starting to see some really broad successes in what they were doing as they walked into holiday in the first couple of months of this year. And we don't want to lose sight of that, right? There was something there that was working, and we were seeing green shoots in the business and in the women's performance and the things that they were doing that were working well. And it's like, you can't just walk away from those because there was something there that the female consumer was gravitating toward. And it's easy to pivot quickly and say, well, she's buying all this stuff right now. Well, true, but she was also appreciating some of the other garments that we were putting into the market. And let's continue to keep those alive to make sure that we let them grow and sprout, because some of these things that we try are very small, right? And that's where data helps a lot too. The things that are all going to rise to the top of the large programs that drive a ton of volume, they're going to always be at the top of the report. But a lot of times you miss is those smaller items that you've tested or are playing with that perform really, really well. But because they don't drive the volume, they don't get they don't get the visibility that they deserve. Having that data available to us and being able to look at that in a clearer way and say, hey, yeah, this program, there's a program that we're running called Dream Cloth, which is it's a product that's the quality of the product is really, really soft and comfortable. And it wasn't a huge program to begin with, and you wouldn't really have picked up on it. But the consumer was gravitating towards it. We were acquiring customers through it. We were bringing back people into the brand. So females who hadn't bought the product in 2 years were coming back and buying that particular product. Now, the volume was small, but the impact it was having on how we were acquiring and retaining people was huge. So it's like that visibility is really how we're thinking about the remainder of this year and going forward and using data to help inform those things.
Yeah, those are incredible stories and incredible insights. There's so many aspects there that you touched on, from forecasting to planning to production, and the full gamut across a channel that is now your primary channel, but also as you guys look to recover and get back into obviously the retail stores and the wholesale stores hopefully soon here. So incredible insights there. Thank you so much. As kind of a closing statement, do you have any recommendations for folks in the audience as they're maybe not as far along in having a platform that gives them access to this data or to these insights, or maybe just something that the pandemic has kind of raised at Vineyard Vines that you've taken away? Is there a nugget that you could offer to the team as maybe support or something informative?
I think one of the things that I've learned the most is that it's really important to listen to the business community and listen to the end user and understand the way that they work. Because you can build dashboards all day long and you can roll up data all day long, but if you don't understand the way that they operate and consume the information and the business decisions they're trying to make, you many times may present them something that they just can't use, right? And that appreciation, engaging with them, understanding their challenges, thinking through the challenges with them, and then presenting them something in an agile way that they can iterate on and feel like they have ownership of, I think has been really beneficial to us. We've been able to adapt and pivot and move, and they feel bought in, right? And historically, at least in my experience, I've seen a lot of things just pushed down to the businesses. This is what you're going to see. This is the reporting you're getting. And then many times doesn't answer the questions that they have. And when the business is changing this much, this often right now, that approach is not going to work. It has to be iterative and very fluid. Otherwise, you'll end up building things that don't matter, and you'll lose people. They'll just drop off and they'll go do their own thing in a very siloed way.
Absolutely. All right. Great insight. Great time. Thank you so much, Chris, for jumping on this morning, and hope you have a fantastic day. Appreciate it, bud.
Yeah. Bye.